Rape revenge films became a prominent exploitation subgenre in the late 1960s following the rise of second-wave feminism that sought to liberate expressions of female sexuality. The films were extremified representations of fears of toxic masculinity that sought to degrade, sodomize, and control women through sexual dominance. The first act would establish the eventual victim and rapist with particular focus given to their respective gender roles within a patriarchal society. The second act is a transgressive expose of imbalances and hypocrisies of patriarchal status quo. And the third act is the violent revenge, the victim turned hero operating outside of failed law systems, killing the rapist through dramatically ironic means of castration. In her essay The Monstorous-Feminine, B.Creed notes that cinema's portrayal of violent women is built on a difference grounded in monstrousness which invokes castration anxiety. This supposedly serves as empowerment, as the women were able to kill tangible evil. Yet in a contemporary context, this narrative structure has retroactively become problematic as it presents an ideology of morally justified violence as empowerment and justice, as well as possibly creating spectacle and eroticism out of intense suffering and trauma. Jennifer Kent's The Nightingale at first adheres to this structure but becomes a more poignant introspective character drama of apathy and determinism. Set during the Black War of the 1820s, The Nightingale follows Irish immigrant Claire in a violent revenge hunt for Lieutenant Hawkins, a British commander that brutally murdered her family and raped her. The film is Kent's sophomore follow-up to 2008 indie darling The Babadook. The Nightingale is an Australian Gothic revenge tale drowning in the nihilism and genocidal colonialism of Australia's history. Jonathan Rayner describes Australian Gothic as the exploration of iniquitous authority and its repeated depiction of brutal and uncompromising masculinity. There is no catharsis or entertainment in the depiction of violence. Lacking musical cues, dramatic standoffs, or intense close-ups, the violence is uniquely uncinematic and unceremonious. This is in direct contrast to more recent Australian films like Lion, the Stormboy remake, and The Dressmaker that feature narrative possibilities of violence and depravity but take a more sentimental direction in an attempt to convey a positive moral message of strength and community across Australia. This makes The Nightingale an anomaly in Australian cinema for its unflinching focus on depravity. Preceding the Irish War for Independence, Ireland was under the British monarchy with increasing tensions due to the outlaw of Protestant ownership of the land. Combined with the Great Famine, many Irish civilians attempted to flee the nation but had nowhere to go. Claire was able to flee along with her husband but is under contractual control of Lieutenant Hawkins, perpetuating an underlying thematic through line of dominance and free will. Claire justifies her violent revenge as an eye for an eye, motivated by love over sadism. Her journey spiritually echoing the fable of Orpheus, a myth of a man traversing hell to bring his lover back from the dead. Even the title of the film refers to an Irish song of the same name about a young lover's paradise away from war, with the bird symbolizing an escape from cruelty. The central victim of a rape revenge narrative is a typical embodiment of purity and innocence often expressed through Christian iconography. Yet Claire isn't entirely innocent, nor is she religious. She's even racist towards Billy and other Aboriginal people. Even when she manages to kill the soldier responsible for the death of her child, it releases the immediate anger but doesn't solve anything. The world continues on despite the horror, and she is still plagued with nightmares, survivor's guilt, and trauma. It is only through the guidance of her literal guide, Billy, that Claire becomes empathetic of others' plight, and her motivation for revenge slowly withers away. Hawkins' sole goal of obtaining a promotion derives from a superiority complex, hypocritically seeing the world around him as lesser due to supposed untamed wilderness, whilst perpetuating vile acts of rape and murder. Hawkins repeatedly undermines and bullies his fellow soldiers for lacking hypermasculine discipline, preying upon their inferiority complexes of heroism like an animal toying with his food. Hawkins even murders a young boy that he's been preaching his own ideologies to when the boy doesn't shoot Billy, perceiving the mercy as cowardice that would not further the hypocritical colonialist values of civilizing the relative uncivilized. Hawkins' sexual abuse of women is only partly motivated by arousal, but he sees it as the ultimate form of domination and masculine superiority. Billy initially rejects violence, but after witnessing mass racial motivated genocide of Aboriginal people at the hands of British soldiers, he uses violence as a means of change, his initial carefree attitude coming from a place of naivety rather than conscious apathy, but believes the killing of the soldiers will at least further stop harm to others even though it might not be morally righteous. The second act low point shows a couple stumble across Claire but choose to ignore her suffering and continue walking to town. Their choice of apathy only perpetuating further suffering, just like Claire's passing of her family helplessly watching their house burn. The third act of a conventional revenge narrative depicts the killing of the big bad as a cathartic eye for an eye, justice that will stop further exploits and let the victims' souls pass in peace. After all the horror we have seen, we deserve a payoff, a catharsis, the triumph of trauma. Their pain cannot go unexpressed. These men are awful, irredeemable people that won't change. They must die, right? But instead, Claire confronts Hawkins in song, and simply walks away. The victim's revenge is an inversion of traditionalist patriarchal values. As Rachel Jean notes, women have been constructed socially to cultivate female expressions of aggression and violence, mechanisms through which those who don't have the permission or power to behave violently may engage in as alternative ways of behaving to express more socially acceptable female forms of violence. The film's ending recontextualizes the titular song to one of inner acceptance. The external world may be doomed to interminable cycles of violence and colonial expansion, but in this brief moment of the sunrise, the characters are internally free and at peace. Through the Nightingale, Kent expresses the cynical determinism of violence deeply embedded in Australia's colonial history. Genocide, rape, and othering only lead to generational trauma and further alienation. It is only when we support each other can we truly begin to heal.